over 1.2 million students benefiting from free SHS. We have a budget this year in excess of 2 billion Ghana cedis to feed them. Feeding them on less than 1 cedi per meal, and that is even not available. So they have been starving. Parents and philanthropists have been running to the rescue of the schools. What must happen, especially faced with the reality of the broke economy? The free SHS, should it and will it continue in the form that it presently is? Or, now faced with the reality, what Ken Ofori-Atta suggested earlier, but was opposed by his own government, will become the way to go. Let those who can afford pay. Well, we also have the bigger debates about what impoverishes this country a lot more. The CDD did a survey and estimated that to prosecute a successful presidential campaign, you need at least $100 million. Translate that into cedis. The majority leader, quote unquote, Osei Mensah-Bonsu, has been delivering a lecture at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. And he says it does look like a presidential candidate needs some 50 million, some 400 million Ghana cedis. And that money comes from the sources that we already know. Kickbacks, the contracts that are inflated at the expense of the poor taxpayer. He has a suggestion. We should go the Westminster way to avoid this cost. He believes in what has been preached by many for a long time now, that the president does not need more than 19 ministers in Accra for the business of government. In fact, he has some other very serious views. We have the best team to analyze this issue at a time when Fix the Country has got all of us thinking seriously about fixing the Constitution to fix the country. I'm Samson Lardy Anyenini, and you're welcome to Newsfile. We'll be right back to deal with the vexed matters. You're welcome back. And for my take today, I am adopting Kojo Yansing's that he did on Monday about trust.
Rise a group, and then they follow him or her to achieve a common goal or goals. Now, if a person rises from a group and everything they say turns out to be, who will agree to follow them? And without followers, are you a leader? So if we're wondering why, as a people, we never seem to get anywhere, the answer is simple. It's because our leaders are not trustworthy. So they have led us nowhere. Once upon a time, Some white people ran this nation. A leader called Kwame Nkrumah convinced the people of Ghana to follow him in a fight for independence. Made the people believe that black man was capable of managing his own affairs. So we followed him to take back our nation from these white people. It's been 65 years since then, and in that time, we have been to the IMF 17 times. Now, let's get something straight. It doesn't matter what the foot soldiers tell you on social media. When a country goes to the IMF for a bailout, it means they have failed to manage their own affairs. However you try to spin it, the fact remains. So what this means is that none of our leaders since Nkrumah have been able to fulfill that promise that he made of managing our own affairs. So again, let me ask you, do you trust your leaders? Let's bring it closer to home. So this government dragged us by force out of the last IMF program with promises that we would never mismanage our economic affairs again. Immediately after promising us that, they proceeded to mortgage into a 335 billion cedi hole, while wasting our painfully paid taxes on unjustifiable expenditure, like private jet rentals, and illegally blowing money that we said we can't find to build schools and hospitals on a $350 million cathedral that nobody asked for. Look, let's talk about that confounded cathedral for a minute. Without proper parliamentary approval, this government has funneled millions of dollars into the president's private unilateral fantasy. Meanwhile, the things that will save lives have been abandoned. Hospitals, the entirety of what now people can even call a hoax, Agenda 111, has been jettisoned as we speak. Nothing is happening on that point. Nothing. Meanwhile, up and down this country, people are dying. In 2018, there was a viral video of a pregnant woman being carried across a river from the village of Nagroma in the northeastern region, just so she could get to a hospital in time to deliver her baby. By the time she got there, the baby ended up being stillborn. Now, just like several districts across this country, there is no hospital in Nagroma. But there was a CHIPS compound there at the time. So why did the poor woman not go and deliver her baby there? Get this. It was because the government had not yet commissioned the CHIPS compound. This was 2018. Our checks tell us that the CHIPS compound was eventually commissioned in 2020, 2 years after that woman lost her baby. Let me just ask you, is that not incompetence? So while government is spending our money on the president's priorities, people are dying. Children are going hungry in our schools. We can't afford to feed them. Headmasters are issuing ultimatums that they may have to send these kids home soon if government doesn't find money to feed them. And these are the children that are lucky enough to have a school that has a roof. Others are sitting under trees. None of them is a priority of priorities to the president. So how are we supposed to trust that our leader will make good decisions on our behalf? Look, in any relationship, lies and secrets break trust. So every time the government lies or keeps a secret, our trust in them is shattered even further. So when we keep asking government to account to us for how they spend our money, and they keep refusing to do so, how are we supposed to trust them? The president decided to abandon the perfectly presidential jet that we spent hard-earned money to buy, and instead was hiring private jets. When we asked the government to explain the decision, the defense minister came to tell us that presidents can't bath in our presidential jet. When we asked them to tell us how much it is costing us to hire the jets that presidents can bath in, we were told that the cost of hiring these jets was somehow a matter of national security. Jets that we hired from companies that advertise their services on the World Wide Web, is a matter of national security. Honestly, how do you think we are? The defense minister told City FM recently, a few days ago, that the president not hired a private bathtub in the past 3 months, except for some Belgium-Rwanda flight last month. And the minister says this is because the president feels our hardship. So, Mr. President, prior to these past 3 months, you were jetting all over the place in the lap of luxury. Did you not feel our hardship then? As you were flying around the world in a 34 million cedi bathtub, your citizens could not afford rent. They could not afford trotro fares. National service personnel were being paid the cost of their travel to and from work. In December last year, a litre of fuel was 670 pesos. We are in July. A litre now costs 14 Ghana cedis. Is government telling us that the president was not feeling any of this hardship until just 3 months ago? Yesterday, the president announced that he has reduced appointees' salaries by 30% because of our hardship. What he did not say was that he is still paying their allowances, including their DSTV bills, spectacle allowance, the cost of medical care abroad, not to forget the thick bundles of dollars that are shoved into their hands every time they travel, all in the name of per diem. As for ex-gratia, let's not even touch on it. So when this leader tells you he feels your hardship, do you trust him? COVID affected the whole world. We say it affected us so much that our economy got crippled to the point where we now need another IMF bailout. This same COVID was the reason why the World Bank, the IMF, our own Bank of Ghana, Japan, and other countries gave us a total of 25 billion Ghana cedis. The finance minister was called to come and account for how that money was spent. He delayed until eventually he came and told us what was done with less than half of that money. Over 13.5 billion of it was not accounted for. All he said was that it was used for budget support. What budget support? You can collect 25 billion for a purpose and spend less than half of it on that purpose, and we are supposed to trust you. So now we are going to the IMF for a bailout, and still, even in our moment of shame, our leaders will not accept that they have failed to manage our economy. They keep telling us that it is COVID, Ukraine war, that caused it. Now, as for them, they did nothing wrong. A solid team. According to Bright Simmons on Newsfile last weekend, COVID and Ukraine will explain about 30 to 35% max of the economic hole that we are in. So what explains the remaining 5 to 70%? What happened? I'll tell you what happened. Our finance minister happened. When the founder of Data Bank was appointed finance minister in 2017, Ghana's total public debt was 122 billion Ghana cedis. Today, we are in the red to the tune of 335 billion Ghana cedis, according to the Ministry of Finance's website. So, in stewardship, Ghana's debt stock has increased by a spectacularly shocking 213 billion Ghana cedis. But how? What sort of indiscipline could lead to such unsustainable levels of debt? Is the finance minister incompetent? That's hard to imagine. I mean, this is the man who founded Data Bank, perhaps the top investment bank in Ghana. How can he not know what he's doing? Well, let's consider some facts. Every time Ghana goes to borrow from the bond market, Data Bank makes money. That's because the finance ministry has appointed the company that the finance minister founded as market specialists. Another company called Black Star Brokerage has also been hired by the finance ministry to provide the same service. It was founded by Charles Edubuahin, who is the Minister of State responsible for finance. So as Ghana sinks deeper into debt, these two companies, founded by the two people in charge of our economy, are getting richer. Now ask yourself, how motivated are the managers of our economy to explore solutions other than borrowing? Do you trust them to make decisions that are in the nation's interest and not in their own personal benefit? Do you trust them? Anyway, we're now going to the IMF and hoping for some $2 to $3 billion bailout. The thing about IMF borrowing is that it does not involve paying transactional advisors or market specialists. So Databank and Blackstar will not make a penny on this bailout. I wonder whether that explains how adamantly the finance minister was just a few weeks ago that we will not go to the IMF. Yeah, you remember, he was frantically telling Bible stories to convince us that this was not the goal, that we are a proud country, so we should proudly sink further into. Well, Databank humbly rakes in millions. Okay, we trust you. The public sector workers whose calls and letters you are now ignoring, trust you. The national service personnel whose allowances can't even pay for their transport, trust you. The NABCO recruits who are still waiting for the permanent jobs you promised, trust you. The school children who you can't feed, trust you. The trotro drivers who can't afford fuel, trust you. The laborers who can't afford to eat twice a day, trust you. The people of Greater Accra, Central and Western regions whose lives and property get washed away whenever it rains, trust you. The decent, hard-working Ghanaians who agreed to pay an e-levy because you said it would save our economy, trust you. Decent, hard-working Ghanaians who can no longer remit money to their family members because of the same e-levy, trust you. We all trust you, okay? How can we not? After all, you feel our hardship, don't you? It's only caring leaders like you who steal the very earth from beneath our feet and will it to their families forever. We trust you, and you care about us. Let's see how long we can keep lying to each other before everything goes up in flames. This is the Super Morning Show. Stay with us.
Thank you, Kojo Yankson. And my guest this morning on this show, Professor Bafo Ajuman Dua, former UN Senior Governance Advisor. Also here in the studio, Martin Pebu, private legal practitioner. Kofi Bento is joining us via Zoom. He's lawyer and Senior Vice President, Imani Africa. And Kofi Asari, Executive Director, Africa Education Watch, also joining us via Zoom. So, how do we resolve the problem of starvation in our schools as heads or some of the heads begin to ponder and contemplate shutting down for lack of food? Food that we budgeted over 2 billion for this year, and food that each student takes less than 1 cedi per meal. Think about that. And the free SHS, you hear the president even now talk about the fact that it will not be cancelled. Has anybody said or asked that it should be cancelled? What sort of review is needed if the government will heed the many calls for a review, including by one of its own, the one in charge of the Exchequer, Ken Oforiatta, who said this much earlier? We'll take a quick break and return to have my guest look at this issue, and thereafter we will look at the questions of governance and how we can have a government that is not as expensive as we currently have, but are we willing to tweak the constitution to achieve a government of not more than 19 ministers, a president, perhaps no vice president, and a situation where the leaders are not, quote unquote, forced to inflate contracts to be able to make or build a war chest of about 100 million US dollars to prosecute a campaign where they buy votes. We'll be right back.
are now at the World Senior High Technical School, which has a student population of a little over 1,400 students. Majority of these students, their survival actually depends on this dining hall. And so we are right here to speak to the students and then to know the effect about this imminent shortage of food, of what impact, of what effect is really going to have on them. The alarm bells at the World Senior High Technical School fixed on the rooftop of one of the classes sounded for about 30 seconds and followed with announcement for supper. It's time for supper. The students responded and went into the dining hall in droves, already aware of the imminent food shortage at the school.
Since the food have been shortage, we have been suffering from our school. Even our study is not going normal. As there is in the normal breakfast, when we go to take breakfast, there is not even a little drop of sugar. There is not any sugar for we normally take it raw, which is affecting us.
Some of us like this, when we are coming, we are not able to get money to buy gari, sugar, and millet in those days. So as we are in school right now, studies is really difficult for us. Sometimes we'll go to the class, we want to study because of the hunger. We cannot study. We just learn small and we'll start to sleep.
Because when you don't have something in your stomach, definitely you can't learn. Looking at it too, if you don't have anything in your stomach and outside there is also hard, definitely our parents cannot get us what we need in order to study. That is the food aspect. So looking at it, in fact, we are really dying. Most of our students are not even yet reported because of the shortage of food.
The students say the menu has not been altered due to the imminent food shortage. Authorities at the school only cook for them the food that is available at their store.
For the past 2 months, we have been taking TZ as supper. Every evening we are taking TZ. Now when you look at it, just today.
What were you taking?
We're taking, normally we used to take Banku, we used to take TZ, but nowadays it's only TZ.
Okay, for the supper, as we expect to eat TZ today evening, but the afternoon time, our headmaster, he announced to us that when we go to the food shop, that there is not any corn for us to take TZ again. That we only rice, and the rice we eat the rice.
The shortage, according to the students, also led to the quantity and quality of the food being reduced.
We will go to dining hall and we will get ladder, one ladders. Every student per 1 ladder, and it has been a problem that is facing us.
Even coming to the dining hall, the lunch, the supper, when you go, the quantity of food that we're supposed to serve in each bowl is now decreased, and when you eat, it will not get to any time, and you feel angry again, who will not help us in our studies academic to improve our work.
They appeal to the government to quickly come to their aid to prevent the imminent closure of the schools.
Our president, Nana Akufo-Addo, we need your help. We need you to pay the teachers so that they'll be able to come back, and our food too. We need you to get it for us, because when the Form 1s came, you didn't give the Form 1s their food. They came and used our food. So right now we are shortage of food. So we need you to try your best and do everything for us.
So we are appealing for the government that even if there is not going to be any food, but he should let our juniors go home, so that we the Form 3s will be able to get enough food and study hard to pass. If not, in fact, it's not going to help us at all.
We try to speak to authorities here at the school. They would not like to speak to us on camera for fear of victimization, but the information that we have gleaned on indicates that they had calls from the regional buffer stock telling them that they want to treat the Apple situation as an emergency, and so they are going to deal with it locally here. And so they have asked people to go to the market and also do a market survey, and after which they will report to them. The situation at the World Senior High School is also not different. A drive around the school showed majority of the students have since not reported back to school from the Eid celebration. The blunt truth, however, is that majority of them are staying away as a result of the food shortage and wouldn't want to come only for the school to be closed down in the next few days. Reporting for the news, Rafik Salam. of good outcome.
Majority of the students are coming from this region. Our parents or their parents are not able to provide them with any provision. I mean, like food. They themselves are even struggling at home to eat. So if the students do not get one meal, if the school were to run short and not able to provide them with either a breakfast or a lunch or a supper, it's just that there's no food to give to them. Trust me, they will riot. Even if the strike was to end today, if the teachers were to call off the strike today, and the food shortage persists, my brother, we cannot help the students.
She's complaining bitterly about the kind of food that they give them. The quantity is not enough, the quality too is not there. So she's complaining a lot, and it's, according to her, it's not she alone who is complaining. Almost all their colleagues and everything are complaining about the food. So because of that reason, she sent me a lot of pictures and everything of what they have been taking in the school. So I decided to be sending her some little money to support her to be able to study effectively. Within a week or 2 weeks, I can send her 100 cedis.
My bro school. Now see, I'm about to school. Okay, to be a man. Someone is a friend last Saturday. Say your mom will be an anopa. Mom pa. Your mom will be an embryo. Also, Cocoa, brother, a pampocho. A pampocho. Planet bread. She said, move enough. Don't have to. Now, best go baby keep closer.
My daughter is in one of the senior high school in the Volta region. And on Saturday, she called that for the whole day, they didn't cook for them. The kitchen was closed. The teachers also went on strike. There's nobody on the compound. They were there alone, hungry. The way the situation was, I felt no. She has to come back. So I called that she should come back, and I sent money to her, and she's back at home now with me.
Many of the schools even had their own school farms. They used to grow maize themselves. Some of them even produced enough to sell to augment the finances of their schools. They used to run poultry farms and were able to supply eggs to their students. Apart from giving the children some practical experience in agriculture, it also helped the schools to feed the children well. Now they have to sit and put their hands in between their legs and wait for somebody in Accra to determine when and where they are going to get their food supplies. And that's what is causing all this. Now, before you can do that, you also have to make sure that this policy, which now government seems to be thinking of accepting, that those who can pay should be allowed to pay. The schools will always have some money to keep the schools running, whilst whatever is due from government will come in, if children are paying for their own feeding. Tuition has always been free since Kwame Nkrumah's time. It is boarding which was costing parents all the time. Now, once government decided to take the burden of boarding, these problems were bound to happen.
The challenge that we have within the food supply arrangement, which is being coordinated by the buffer stocks, has to do largely with delays of payment, which usually results in delays in the supplies of food. As a long-term measure, the Minister for Education has engaged some banks, ADB for instance, is one, to find an alternative source of payment or funding with the full food supplier arrangement, where suppliers have to supply food, then the banks will quickly go in, pay the claims that this supply made, and at the end of the day, government reimburses the bank. So in the long term, that is what we believe will be able to sustain the current arrangement that we are having. But of course, as a very short-term measure, there has been reports of food shortages and potential food shortages in most of the schools. I mean, if you read the press that was issued by Upper West Chapter, clearly they cited a potential food shortage. And based on that, the Minister for Education has to act and intervene. And as I speak with you, arrangements have been far advanced for suppliers to supply foods to avoid a potential food shortage within the region and some schools that may have similar challenges. So yes, we do admit the food challenges. Sometimes it may not necessarily be even delays in payment. A lot of time you may have some logistical constraints like storage facilities, even out the food. But like yes, we do admit that it has more to do with the delays of the payment and the suppliers not having the power or the capacity to be able to supply against the future. But this is being worked on.
Right, so you had a report from WA by Rafiq Salam. You had also complaints coming from the Maoli school and other parts of the country, parents complaining about their children being starved. And then you had Professor Ivan Adai-Mensah, former VC of the University of Ghana, who has also been saying quite a lot about the need to review this system over a while now, except that it does appear that the government doesn't want it mentioned. Even when the word review is used, it does appear that there is so much against it. In 2021, in May, Joy FM, the Super Morning Show particularly, had gotten parents calling into the show and complaining about the circumstances of their children's education in the system and made suggestions as to improve it. In fact, the show also featured the GES in the discussions as to interrogate a path forward which will be better for everybody else. The president, speaking at a ceremony at the University of Cape Coast on Saturday, May 29, where he was giving an honorary doctorate degree, accused this station of running a campaign against free SHS. Just feedback. He was uncomfortable with it. Now, as you listen to some of the matrons and the heads of these institutions, they talk about the problem having persisted for about 2 years now. The question is, why have they not been speaking? They almost all seem to speak in unison that they have been afraid of victimization. Why so? Now, let me begin with Kofi Asari, Executive Director of the Africa Education Watch, who have been on the ground and are better familiar with these developments. Kofi, how widespread is this problem of the feeding? And what do you know to be sort of the solutions that are being introduced? We understand like people like Ibrahim Muhammad took, for example, 1,000 bags of rice and several other things in a whole trailer to Tamale Secondary School. And I think yesterday I was listening to the headmaster there, feeling very grateful that that is what has sustained them for a while now. And parents are also being asked to contribute. In some schools, parents are being asked to contribute 500 Ghana cedis. It's not compulsory.
Morning, Samson and panel, and then morning to the viewers and then the listeners. I want to indicate that what is happening today is not new. It's always happened per Chassis' own Eastern Regional release, and that it appears that the magnitude and the dimension is much bigger, and wider this time. But I'm aware that emergency measures have been put in place. About 60,000 bags of rice and then 10,000 bags of sugar were supposed to have been deployed on Tuesday. They began arriving from Wednesday. I'm also informed that about 50 million Ghana cedis payments have been made by the Ministry of Finance to buffer stock to pay some of the debt. And that is what I know so far as the emergency measures put in place to mitigate the symptoms, not to solve the problem.
But Samson, for us to appreciate this, you must understand that the free senior high school feeding is 70% of the free senior high school program. Okay, so free senior high school is simply government paying your fees. These fees government is paying, 70% is feeding. Now let's understand it within the context of our philosophy as a nation and our attempt to operationalize Article 38.2, which seeks to, would provide free basic education for all Ghanaian children. In 2004, the government then began operationalizing this free education provision in the Constitution by starting with the free basic education. Government then determined that those to benefit from free education were those in the lower income brackets. By so doing, government determined again that the means testing it was going to use to determine those who were in the lower income brackets and deserved free basic education was the private-public dichotomy. And so the assumption then was that if a child is attending a public basic school, they are more likely to fall within the low income bracket, and then vice versa for private schools. This is why, after 16 years or so of running free basic education, it only exists for children who started their education or who attended public primary schools. Now, if you are providing free basic education for these cohorts, which you believe are below the low income or within the low income brackets, it is only logic within this same framework to say that as these same children progress to secondary, continue providing them a free education. On the flip side, those you determine that were not qualified to enjoy free because they do not belong to the low income bracket by virtue of they being patrons of private education. When they proceed to secondary or progress to secondary, it is logical to say that once we determined at basic that you were not in the low income category because by virtue of you being patrons of private education, continue and pay for your fees at secondary. This should have been the logical transition from junior high school to senior high school within the context of providing free basic education. Unfortunately, we had a situation where when we go to secondary education, we decided that even though these cohorts that entered basic have now gotten to secondary, and they are the ones we know that belong to the lower income bracket, we decided to make it wholesale free to include those from the private school brackets. What that happens normally in policy management, you should rather look at that to be the end. Let's start with those we know are in the low income bracket per our definition of economically vulnerable children at the basic level. And then let's give them the free education at secondary level. When it gets to the point where the state believes it has enough resources to extend it to cover the private school students, we do so. Unfortunately, we started ours from the end. We gave it to everybody. And then since then, we've been struggling because we are spending about 1.3 to 1.4 billion a year in feeding the children of both rich people and poor people. Now, once you do so, the challenge is that in an economy like ours,
Kofi, sorry to interrupt you, but you said we are spending between 1.3 and what?
1.4 billion a year in feeding students in senior high schools.
In 2019, the budget was 1.68. In 2020, it was 2.43. In 2021, it was 1.97. And then this year is 2.3. So the figure you are quoting is less.
Out of the 2.3, 70% is just feeding. There are other aspects of the bill, uniforms, school cloth, exercise books, etc., etc. Feeding alone is about 70%.
Okay.
So because of our economic situation, because there are liquidity issues, what is happening is that the Ministry of Finance is unable to raise funds to fund this 1.3, to fund both the feeding and the non-feeding aspects. So fund delay is normal. Now, whilst fund delays for other aspects of the budget, or on top of the free senior school budget can be managed, those affecting feeding can hardly be managed because the children are in boarding houses. So the delay in funding has caused suppliers who say their funds have been locked up, for some being owed as far back as September last year. Their funds have been locked up, so they don't have money to keep supplying a particular school or a particular group of schools. When that happens, what you experience is that even though invoices would have been issued to suppliers, they will not be able to supply the goods at all, or when they supply, you find that they undersupply. And if you read the CHAS statement, the history reading CHAS statement, they indicated that they are signing for 100 kg bags maize, even though the actual quantity per the scale that Stock has given to them is 60 kg. So it means that suppliers are undersupplying. So even when they supply on time, because they are supplying between 20 to 40% under the actual supply, the students will still suffer reduction in rations. The portions of food given them will reduce, and then also you will have shortages, even though they supplied on time. But in our case, they are not supplying on time because they are owed about 400 million Ghana cedis, and then when they supply, they are compelled to undersupply. That is the situation we have on our hands now. And until we begin to look at certain options to help ease the burden of government, it will be challenging for the education sector to show that this cost. I'm saying so because we all know that, for example, look at GET Fund. GET Fund is the largest fund in the education sector. Last year, less than 50% of allocated GET funds was actually disbursed. Less than 50%. It means that there's a serious liquidity issue in the sector. And so, in the midst of all these severe, liquidity constraints, one option available to government, if government is actually committed to looking at this issue holistically, is that parents can reduce this burden by one. For example, if we ask parents of the private school students I started my narrative with to pay their free senior high school fees, and how much are they going to pay? The average free senior high school fees government is paying is 1,500 Ghana cedis for a whole year. That is the average, 1,500 Ghana cedis for the whole year. It is more than the average junior high school fees in a year. So if we ask those parents who came from the private sector to pay their 1,500 Ghana cedis a whole year as free senior high school fees, what will happen is that government will save 520 million Ghana cedis, free 520 million Ghana cedis to support what we are now struggling to finance. Because now, if Ministry of Finance had 400 million Ghana cedis, the feeding problem would have been solved. So that option alone would free 520 million Ghana cedis. That's about 40% of the entire feeding budget of free senior high school. And that will be a significant release. It will make sure that, as Professor Diamond has said, as government investment delays, there will be some money at the school level to ensure that nothing like food shortages occur. Another option that Ben has, option 2, is to look at cost optimization. And I've seen optimization in the IMF's documentation. We can reduce certain cost lines and still maintain the value of the policy. The value of the policy, to ensure that the poor and marginalized and vulnerable are not denied of secondary education on the basis of fees or costs. How can we do that? Let's look at some of the items. If you put together school uniforms, school cloth, PE kits, and exercise books, all those 4 items are actually bought by parents when the students are in basic school, even in the public schools. Okay? And let me indicate that even in public basic schools, they don't have free exercise books. They don't have free uniforms, even in public basic schools. Even in the 75 deprived districts in Ghana, where poverty is endemic, they don't have free school uniforms and they don't have free exercise books. These are available at the secondary school for free. If we take these 4 items out alone, in a year, government will save 160 million Ghana cedis. And so cost optimization is one area we can look at, reducing costs without necessarily affecting the value of the free senior high school program. And then secondly, asking parents who on the basis of their patronage of private education from a basic level to continue to pay 1,500 Ghana cedis a whole year, not a term. And that includes the cost of feeding. So that Ghana government can have 520 million every year to support the free seniors committee. These are the two options available for government to consider if it is really minded.
Thank you. They sound reasonable and forward-looking. Let me go to Kofi Bentil, and strategically because of Imani Africa, and when the program was started or was being debated to be started, they had a lot to say, especially in the area of the funding. But much earlier, in the second attempt of Nana Akufo-Addo to become president, he gave an interview to the BBC and the question came up about cost. I remember how much time we spent on Newsfile debating that issue. Let's listen to him briefly.
Made. You, for example, have offered free secondary schooling for all Ghanaians. A promise you say you absolutely will deliver in 4 years in power.
Absolutely.
So have you costed it? How much will it cost?
The costing is being done. I mean, very, very soon we will be in a position.
You can't make a promise like that.
No. Very soon we're going to be putting it out.
You don't know how much?
I do know, but I prefer to tell the Ghanaian people directly before I tell you.
Many of them can't talk. You can tell me.
It doesn't matter. I would prefer to make that statement to the people of Ghana directly first, as to the cost. And any
so you do know the cost?
Oh, we do, and we have a very good idea how also we're going to finance it.
Well, you're obviously not going to give me the figures, but just tell me how you're going to pay for it. Because it's clearly going to be a very great cost. You've got to train the teachers. You've got to build new schools.
All of that has been adequately costed, and we believe that first of all, the new revenues will help, more efficient management of what we have now, growth in the Ghanaian economy. These are the three sources which are going to enable us to fulfill that promise. And it's a promise that has been solemnly made to the Ghanaian people, and it's going to be solemnly kept, not because it's a campaign promise, but because it is a necessity for the future of our country to educate all our young people and not to acquiesce in a situation whereby only segments of the community that have some money are able to educate their children.
It's an interesting point.
It's a major issue of human capital development.
Indeed.
And if we do not make the effort to achieve that, the development paradigm that we want to achieve is going to be very difficult for us to do.
Right, so Kofi Bentil, and I remember after this interview, Nana Kumia was on this show, and he suggested, well, they are trying to cost it, they are now trying to do some things. It was very clear that the president, didn't have the maths. He evaded the question, the figures, very, if you like, intelligently. You, at that time, were very big on the question of the funding. Where do you stand now?
Well, good morning to my co-panelists and everyone. So we say in Imani that we always wish we were wrong. If you ask where do we stand now, we are incredulous. We are asking ourselves, how could we end up like this? Because the warning signs were there. From the interview you played, and we had an education desk before 2008, before free SHS was declared. So we were analyzing education. And we had a couple of options, and we were for guaranteeing basic education because we knew that gave us the best, outcome. Then free SHS came. When we analyzed it in our good hearts, okay, what we realized was that the idea is what we all wanted, but the plan is exactly what will kill free SHS or what will kill education guarantee for the poor, and not something. There is no parent in the almost 20 years of our education activism we have come across who is not proud to pay for their child. And I'm talking including poor people. What I mean is that for people who have the means, there was no problem of they seeing their kids through school. So the issue was that you had good enough schools, and that's why you had the private schools blowing up. So the real focus was on the public schools and poor parents. Poor as in they want to, but they can't. And so they ask for help. So we did a lot of work on scholarship. So when free SHS came, and you asked where do we stand, what we kept talking about was that you can achieve this goal without going the route you are saying. And I heard Kofi Asare speak, and I totally agree with him. If you go ahead the way this is structured, you may end up destroying even what we have, and you may not achieve what you are looking to achieve. And here we have a situation where Kofi Asare was just telling you, and I'm saying so because I don't want you to necessarily use what Imani has said. Boarding school is the problem. It is not the solution. When Kwame Nkrumah ran us all into boarding school, he had a plan for it. He had it well costed and well financed, and it succeeded. Now, going down the line, it is not necessary for you to do what we needed to do in the 60s and had a different economic dynamic right now in 2022 when we totally have a different economic dynamic. So where do we stand? We stand in a situation where what is not necessary to guarantee education for Ghanaian children is what is killing education for Ghanaian children. Nobody can make a good enough argument why we should pay for rich people and even ordinary people to go to boarding school. There is no argument. If you ask me where do we stand, we still stand by that. It does not make sense to pay for people to go to boarding school free. Not even the developed countries do that. Let me add this point. The only reason why we get into this kind of crisis, there are only two reasons. One, it's a lack of funds, and two, a lack of competent management. Only two. A lack of funds and a lack of competent management. And most of it has to do with what Kofi Asare was saying. It has to do with the boarding school dynamic, which has to do with housing people and feeding them. That's 90% of boarding school.
Is this...
And that is not what is required to deliver good enough free education. But that is what is killing it. That's where we stand as a country today.
Is this the problem? Your own Bright Simmons says that free SHS will end up turning all the public secondary schools in Ghana into Saito, like it happened with primary schools, just as analysts predicted. But it has become Ghana's version of the UK's NHS. No one can touch it. Politicians can only compete on who will invest more into it.
We came to that conclusion about 5 or so years ago. And we came to that conclusion after analyzing what happened to the primary schools. We have professors in this country today. We have very learned people in this country today who went to public schools, what we now call Saito. There was a time around the 70s that the governments took it over with the same arguments as pre-SHS. And when the government and GS and Co took it over, they proceeded on a certain line. At the end of the day, you had what we call elite flight and abandonment. When you say elite flight and abandonment, what we mean is that schools usually thrive when you have parents, teachers, and co invested in it and continue to work at it, like the old students network you see. Elite flight and abandonment is where government takes over. They don't allow anybody to talk. Parent-teacher associations are sidelined. All students are sidelined. Government decides to do everything. I'll do textbooks. I'll do food. I'll do this. It happened to the public primary schools. What happened is that then the elite, even teachers, took their children from the primary schools and took them to so-called international schools we all went to. Now, the point is, we studied that across two decades. And we realized that after the elite flight, nobody was talking about primary schools anymore. Everybody was just paying money and sending their kids there. So it was left to maybe the poor and people who may not have a big voice. And then abandonment happened because then nobody cared what happened to them. At the end of the day, we got what we call Saito in the primary or public primary school sector, which all of us are running away from. And we made that point. And if you remember, I made that point first on Newsfile, and later I made it again also on Newsfile, and said something that in every country there are elite schools. In other places they call them the Ivy Leagues. I'm not talking about Ivy Leagues as a university. These are secondary schools. And it is not a bad thing that there are elite schools. What is bad is that we proceed on a certain path and reduce all our schools, elite and other schools, to the same level on the ground. So Bright is right. And I'm explaining because we didn't even wake up and come to this conclusion. If what is going on continues to go on, you are going to have elite flight and abandonment. People will just leave this place, not talk about it anymore. And mind you, we are spending a lot of money still in the primary public school system. And they are delivering very poor results. In some schools, they are getting 0 passes. Note that they are the people who have trained teachers. Some of these private schools don't have trained teachers, but they are delivering better outputs and outcomes. So look, again, we are sounding a warning. Where we are now, Imani is not gloating. Our worry is that if you listen to us, listen to Kofi Asare. If you listen to us, listen to Ken Oforiatta. If you listen to us, listen to every analyst who has looked at free SHS. Our worry is that the things that we said are happening. And like I said, there's only 2 things. If you have the money, you should be able to buy food and house kids, even in boarding school. So here's a problem where we don't have the money. We said that it will become a financial problem. If you have the management, you should be able to plan feeding and housing, because it is something that is static. You know, you eat 3 times a day. You know, people go to bed every night. You should be able to plan it. If you cannot plan it, it's gross incompetence, or you just don't know what you're doing. So look, if we can't do it or we don't want to do it, let us dial back. What we need to do is guarantee that kids will get an education. To get an education, if you go to the US, they don't have to go to boarding school. If you go to the UK, they don't have to go to boarding school. Go to Finland, go to everywhere else. The state that does not pay for people to go to boarding schools. If you want to go to boarding school, go to boarding school. So we really need to dial back and look at this, because those who have the means to pay will always make sure their kids are educated. This kind of mess is going to hurt the poor more than anybody.
Interesting. Thank you, Kofi Bentil. And let me start by saying a special welcome to Professor Bafo Ajimandria, former UN Senior Governance Advisor. I believe that there's a governance issue, that angle that you can look at. And I'm not seeking to sort of limit you as to what you can talk about. But will there not be a difficulty in doing the segregation or segmentation, looking for those who are poor and need, support? Then we say these people can afford, so they should go ahead and afford. Even though Kofi Asare and Bentil agrees, give us a certain structure that appears to be reasonable, that can be relied on to do the kind of separation or segmentation that Ken Oforiatta initially was suggesting. Some will say that thing is more difficult than finding out who can benefit from leave. The government has been successful in determining who deserves leave.
Well, Samson, good morning to you, and indulge me for a few minutes to express my personal admiration for the work you do. It's my first time appearing on this very powerful platform, and I'm very honored indeed. So,
thank you.
And any issue that you bring to the table certainly goes right to the heart of our efforts to make this country a better country. Now, listening to my very good friends, Kofi Bentil and Kofi Asare, in the earlier comments, and your own question that you put to me, I want to distill this whole conversation. Governance is my forte, as you know. And it strikes me that both of them were talking about government taking over everything. And of course, our second subject is also to talk about size of government. And that is very crucial in understanding the challenges that we are facing today. The effort of governments over the years to want to be the center of everything that goes on in this country, and therefore centralizing everything. Look, Samson, the original school feeding program, as you well know, started in the early 2000s. At the turn of the century, the millennium, the United Nations came up with this agenda of Millennium Development Goals for 15 years or so. And amongst them was to alleviate hunger, reduce poverty, on and on. And within that context, it became clear based on several studies by the UN and other agencies, that for developing countries such as Ghana, perhaps it's important to focus on human development. And to do that, you begin with the schools. So the whole idea of school feeding was conceived for the basic schools, period. And in most countries, they start with the daycare centers, and then kindergarten, and the primary school. And you know why, Samson? Studies confirm that the critical period of developing your cognitive powers, your brain, is the first 1,000 days after birth. The first 1,000 days after birth. That's why you need all the nutrients. And you've got to be taken care to be able to develop that. So this is at the basis of this discussion about school feeding program. So the first objective was therefore to introduce a program that will help to develop the nutrients, because studies show that in most developing countries, especially the vulnerables, the neglected of these communities, did not have access to good food. Therefore, school enrollment was also not encouraging. So all these were issues that were taken up in the framework to provide for schools. If you look at most countries that introduced these programs, the purpose was simply to develop the basic level of education. And because of the importance of nutrition, to ensure that our children are well fed to be in school, they will grow up and have what it takes to contribute to national development. Now, what we have seen, and I have to also add that, as part of that agenda, the concept of school feeding is not what I see today. The concept was to make it a community school collaboration. If you ever listen to one of the original proponents, and in fact the first administrator of the school feeding program, the late Dr. Amoako-Tufo.
Yeah, Amoako-Tufo.
Yes, he's one of the original. When President Kufuor introduced it, he explained it clearly that first is an effort to develop the local economy, so that at every level of the school feeding program, it will be localized. You rely on food produced in the community to feed the children.
That's right.
And by so doing, you are improving the local economy itself, and then the kids will have ready access, or the schools will have ready access to the school. This was how it was supposed to be structured. Now, for all kinds of political reasons, subsequent governments have decided to take it forward. In fact, with the free SHS, that seems to be the discussion today, it wasn't meant for seniors high school. School feeding wasn't meant for high schools. Now we have brought it to that level and added so many freebies to it, without regard for the nation's ability to sustain it, you see. So,
if in the campaigns, in the heat of the campaigns, there were even talks about extending the free thing to the universities.
I was going to say that.
And the parties were about competing for that.
Well, we can do it. We have a lot of money.
Okay.
I don't know we have a lot of money for that.
Yes,
no
money for it.
You see, but you see, if you go that route, it means that we are depriving parents of the critical responsibilities every parent should have for their children. So if we are going to create a system where after you give birth, you just lay back, the government takes care of your kid from kindergarten to primary school to high school to the university, the government is providing the shoes, the uniforms, the food, everything. So what's the responsibility of parents? See, these are critical things we have to look at. So for me, what we need to be looking at, the governance aspects of it, is how we restructure the school feeding program away from the centralized system that we have to the localities. And in fact, when we come to discuss governance on the second subject, I guess we can expand on this. How we bring governance to the local levels. Government has taken upon itself to be the only provider of everything that we need in our life. That is totally wrong. You don't have it in capitalist systems. You don't even have it in the so-called communist systems in China. Okay?
That's one of the concerns of Professor Ivan Adaiman.
And I agree with him very much.
The community ownership.
Precisely. And that was the concept, original concept of school feeding was to be owned by the communities. That's why I refer to the idea of communities growing their own crops and feeding the schools. So you create a job for local caterers, you create a job for farmers because their produce will be readily, on the market, and so on and so forth. And Samson, now, when you are looking for good practices, you don't have to go too far away from Africa. Go to Rwanda, how they have managed their school feeding system. They started with 1 egg a week for the school children. And by so doing, they empowered the local poultry industry. And once that industry began to thrive, they increased it to 2 eggs a week. And now, as I speak to you, 3 eggs a week for every school child in Rwanda. And the program is helping them. Okay? So when I refer to the first 1,000 days of birth, these are the kinds of micronutrients that you need, and that Rwanda is showing the way. So I'm saying that the central government doesn't have to take upon itself to be the sole supplier of everything in this country. And I think the way we are managing the educational system, we are producing students who come out empty-headed. And in fact, if you talk to many employers these days, you realize that they are disappointed with even people with triple master's degrees. We are producing them like in a factory without any content. Yeah. So I guess my point is that we need to look at how we govern this particular policy. But the sad thing for me is, in Ghana, it seems like whenever we touch gold, somewhere on the line, it becomes brass, if not dead wood. Because the idea is excellent. We should be able to feed our kids. In fact, at the basic level, maybe we don't even have to segregate. Now, coming to your point about discriminating against who can afford and all that, you can do that. We have census every 10 years, and the statistical services produce wealth of knowledge about ourselves. We can isolate the deprived areas easily, as they do. Then if we're able to straighten up our tax systems, as I think through digitization we are gradually getting there, you can know who amongst the various parents have the means to pay and not to pay, because your tax report would indicate who is qualified and who is not. So there's a system to do that. Maybe we are not there yet. But for now, I think it's very important for government to rethink this whole idea of freebies for everybody. It will not work. Both the NPP promised it, and the NDC. Both parties promised the free education. As you rightly said, some were even talking about free university and uniform.
I support it.
That's fine. You should support it. And if we can preserve our resources for that, I have no problem with that. But the danger is that most things that are run by governments around the world are not efficient. And if you come to Ghana or Africa generally, where corruption is embedded in all the systems that we have, you can easily see how that system will be corrupted. And in the end, the results that you look for will not come to you. So I think this whole notion of school feeding, first I'm suggesting that we should go back to the drawing board and reduce it, make sure the bottom of the ladder is where the focus is in terms of our children who really need good food to develop their capacities. And then gradually we can do the discrimination, as you said, for those who can afford to pay, and those who cannot, the state can take responsibility for them.
Thank you very much. You've just been listening to Professor Bafo Ajmandria, former senior governance advisor, UN senior governance advisor. Now, Martin comes on with what he believes is the fact that we actually have what it takes. President Akufo-Addo, when he was being interviewed in that BBC encounter many years ago, has spoken about 3 sources. He said new wealth, that was the oil wealth. He spoke about growth of the economy and then competent management of the economy. On that head, he was talking about corruption that was eating away our wealth and for which we could not afford it. At the moment, it is less than 1 cedi per meal. And the budget for the senior high schools for this year is just a little over 2 billion. That's 2.3 billion. And like Kofi Asare explains to us, 70% of that will go into the feeding. That is not enough, and yet it is not available. There are those who have been campaigning for the feeding fee to be increased. The government has been very clear, it can't afford it. That is true. Martin.
Yes. Okay, Sam, so you've made a point. So I mean, we really can afford it over and over. That's afford free SHS and go to free university. That's it, and you've said it. The problem is our corruption. It's not that we don't have money. We do, but the few who are in charge of the system are taking everything for themselves. That is where the problem really is. So with all this energy, I think we should look at the systems. What are we going to do to fight corruption so that we can free up this money to fund free SHS? You saw the Auditor General's report. Occupy Ghana made portions of it showing that from 2016 to 2020, we lost about 48 billion. It's 47 billion, 900 and something thousand. So let's just call it 48 billion so that it's easy. 2016 to 2020. How much of this have we recovered? The Mlevo came and started recovering some. And in actual fact, President Mahama said one of the first things the Mlevo did, yes, was to stop a $1 billion theft. $1 billion public officers were going to steal. They were just going to steal it. You remember the case that took Ejaku off office? About $850 million. The Ameri deal. $850 million case. You see, if it hadn't come out, it was going under. So please, corruption is our biggest problem. It's not free SHS. If we tackle corruption, there will be too much money, too much available, too much. And that's how come the president was confident that there's money. The only thing we didn't know is that at that time, he didn't know that he didn't have what it takes to fight corruption. Upon coming to office and seeing the trappings of office, he himself now, I'm sure the jury is out there saying that no, he's not the right man to fight corruption. I'm sure it's very clear to him now that he's really not the right man to fight corruption. And so, we would need somebody else who has the energy, who has the willpower, because President Kufuor showed that he's really not the one. And Samson, you and I know that we'll never leave this case, the case with the OSP, the Northern Development Authority case, where a public officer, a former public officer blows alarm that somebody is about to steal 5 million Ghana. And for 5 months, the president doesn't do anything. The chief of staff is written to in January, and June, still nothing is done. So it tells you that really it's all about corruption. It's not about
that one. Are you disturbed about the fact that the president appears not to have heard anything?
Yeah, extremely.
Because the officers involved are under his command and control.
And so it shows a conspiracy. Yes, so I'm disturbed, showing that no, it tells you that the officers are not acting alone. There's a strong cabal, a very strong cabal, supported by officers in the presidency that are in charge of this. And so, yes, there are figures, and when there's a contract, there's an opportunity to pad it, they'll pad it. There's an opportunity to double, they double, then they chop the money. That's how it's working. You see, so it tells you that it's corruption that's a real problem. People are making millions of dollars, and that is the real truth. Look, let's say, for example, you talk about the bonds. You see, Kujo's take. They take Kujo did. Finance minister, as we sit now, it's public knowledge. He himself told this in parliament. He's made 160 million Ghana cedis from the bonds we've issued. It's not a secret. He appeared before parliament and they asked him, Samson, let's repeat, finance minister or his company, Data Bank, has made about 160 million Ghana cedis from our borrowings, one man. So what do you think? That's just borrowing on the bonds, so government contracts, these road contracts and the rest. What do you think? So people are making money for themselves. Free SHS, 1.3 billion a year.
That's nothing. That's why you don't want to listen to the other side of the coin that, yes, he and his deputy may be associated with the two institutions that are responsible for the Eurobonds,
yes,
and they have made so much.
Yes.
But Databank has always done that job, whether it is MPP in government or not.
Yes.
What do you say to that?
Yeah, so what I'll say to that is that before then, the pie was usually shared. You know, Toby Afede has Strategic African Security, SAS. They also took part. There are other companies, but now it's been monopolized. You see, so now the finance minister is in charge, his company and the Dubois, they get all of it. So you see the difference. They take it, 160 million Ghana cedis from our borrowings, and we are not yet done, so we still have some time to go. So you see that with this current situation where it's all family and friends. Oh, good, Sam, and let's make this clear. Professor Bopin has been referring to it. The president himself has said that our biggest challenge, okay, in public finances, okay, is the exemptions regime. Yeah, Professor
Tax exemptions.
Yes, and the other things. You see, so they give family and friends. You know that popular hotel, one of his in-laws, they gave hundreds of millions of dollars in tax exemptions, and a lot of other companies, okay, mining companies, and you name them. So the president himself is on record to have admitted that our biggest challenge is the exemptions regime. That is the biggest challenge. You chicken change.
You refer to the Occupy Ghana statement.
Yes.
So what can the citizens do beyond complaining? That Domelevo was able to, on the back of the judgment that Occupy Ghana got from the Supreme Court,
yes,
was able to issue disallowances and surcharges, and was able to retrieve in excess of how much?
500 million
to the state. His successor just refuses to issue surcharges and disallowances. Occupy Ghana has been complaining. Almost all civil society organizations now coming together, the 34 civil society organizations. Citizens Coalition is also complaining, and they are making steps to sit down with him and talk to him. Occupy Ghana has issued threats to sue. What else can the citizens do?
Yeah, so citizens have to come together. Let's have more demonstrations. More demonstrations. Look, Sam, the truth is that we've not shown that much anger. And the reason some are finding it difficult to show that much anger is because we bastardized JM. We thought JM was the worst, the vampire we had never seen in our history, and that would be the last. So you talk to people who are even in this side of government, and they're like, oh, I mean, we can't believe it. We drove out JM, okay, and now, through the president's lack of willpower to fight corruption and all the other things, including bathing in the skies, he has resurrected JM, making JM look like a saint. So when you talk to people behind the scenes, what they do is that they find it difficult to eat back their own words, because we had said so much against JM, thinking that the Messiah, Akufo-Addo, had arrived. Okay, so just like the way we had to eat humble pie and go back to the IMF, I entreat citizens to come together. Let's come together and show more anger. We should let it be known to Akufo-Addo that, look, we voted for him. I used to support him. I supported him. I mean, come on. I just thought that he was the solution to all of our problems. So we should make it very clear to him that he's been very wrong. He's not up to the task. And so maybe he can even leave earlier. Nothing stops him from resigning today. Because after climbing the moral high horse, John Mahama cannot teach me how to keep the public purse. John Mahama cannot teach me how to keep the public purse. Today, of course, I'm sure the jury is out. We can compare. Okay? So it's public anger that we have to show. Those who are thinking that by coming out to show public anger, they are strengthening John Mahama. Look, don't look at it that way. It's not automatic that if we boot Akufo-Addo out, John Mahama should automatically come in. No, something else can happen. We call it shaking the kaleidoscope. You shake it. We don't know what will come out. Maybe a Messiah could come out different from John Mahama.
So your problem is that we should not even be talking about, restructuring, free HHS, the feeding, all of that, because it's a money problem. but we should be talking about the fact that we have the money, except that it's being stolen. So
exactly, thievery. You remember Gabi's favorite phrase, sole sourcing is what? Thievery. And today, we've sole sourced and given Ajay over how many? Over 32 million, that's the last tranche. And before that, we had given him money, the Cathedral project, right? So the sole sourcing still has the same meaning, which is thievery. So if Gabi Ochedaku believes that sole sourcing is thievery, and today people are doing thievery, what do? We have to stop them as thieves. You have to stop the thievery. That's the answer. Of course, every system needs change. Okay, so I agree that looking at the education ministry, they can look at how to, restructure the free SHS, but it must continue as free, and we can extend it to the universities once we reduce the thievery.
Kofi Bento wants to make a quick intervention. Kofi, I don't know, before the intervention you make, do you subscribe to the way Martin is looking at all of this, that it comes down to corruption? He's looking at the president's, lack of willpower to fight corruption and this family and friends things we've been talking about. In 2016, the president put up a tweet, and he said, there are a few people who have prospered under this government, largely members of the president's family and his inner circle. I believe that today, when he looks at this particular tweet, I don't know what he will say. What's your reaction to Martin?
So my reaction to Martin is that he is right, that the money per se is not the problem. In our analysis of free SHS, one of the first problems we identified was that they calculated the amounts needed wrongly. Now, the only issue with money is that when you calculate it wrongly, you don't do the necessary allocations. But Martin is right to the extent that if we can cure corruption, free SHS is not the problem. However, it is very far-fetched for you to expect to cure corruption before you can succeed somewhere. So if you connect the two, you have a problem. Okay. The second point is this. In our analysis, we realized that there were major other issues apart from cost. In fact, cost was one issue, and then a logistical system was another issue, and then management was the third. What it means is that if you had all the money, you will come up against the GES, the teacher unions, and just the logistical throughput. You have a situation where school feeding, for instance, like Professor said, the idea was to localize some of these things, even put them under district assemblies. We ended up importing tomato paste from Italy because the whole thing became centralized and messed up. Now, the point I want to make is, if we solved Martin's corruption and we banked all the money, you will come up against a logistical system, just food, water, and those things, and then managing teachers, teachings, textbooks, and that kind of thing. And then you have school management. School management. Now, we don't have time to discuss it, but the point I want to make is that if we take the view that money is the only problem, that's too simplistic. If we solve the money problem, you will come up against some of these other problems, and which is why we need to take a more holistic look at this thing. One of the ways is what Prof is saying. Governance is a big issue, and it has to do with decentralizing schools management down to the districts, and that is not that difficult. We've done it before. Headmasters need to have more authority, and we need to have a situation where this centralized Accra, determination of everything is broken. So I agree with Martin. In fact, one of the things we can do as a country, if we want, if you look at Article 25 and a few of the provisions in the Constitution, is to actually fund education separately and properly. And that's the idea that brought Get Fund. Get Fund, which today has been bastardized by poor leadership, and all that money has been collateralized, and now we are back to square one. So we need to solve those things because the money problem was solved in Get Fund, one way or the other. So Martin, you are right, that is corruption, but you come up against the issues of management, issues of logistics. We need to rethink the education system in Ghana. Thank you.
Interesting. Prof, I'll come to you you will have the last say, final say on this, and then we'll take a break and come to discuss the question of governance and getting cheaper, better sized governments. Kofi Asare, what would you have to say? What would be your final quick comments about how we proceed? You have already given, very clear, suggestions
I think the bigger picture is that Africa has a youthful population, and depending on how we approach socioeconomic empowerment of the youth, they become either a blessing or a national security threat. And Ghana's secondary education push, the whole African drive to ensure that we make good use of this fast-growing youthful population so that we turn them into economic usefuls than burdens. In doing so, we must explore cost-efficient ways of delivering secondary education that has quality, that has the ingredients that really prepare some of the youth for the world of work. And within it, we must appreciate that there are about 8 or 9 countries in Africa currently running free secondary education programs. Ghana is the only country in the world that has free secondary education, which is boarding. It doesn't exist in anywhere in the world. And our model defies, the standard practice globally. Our per capita expenditure on secondary education a year for recurrent alone is $2 a day. The global average is less than $1. We are doing about $2 a day on the per capita recurrent expenditure. Capital expenditure exclusive, just recurrent. So it is difficult to predict that we can sustain expanding access to secondary education and ensuring that all junior high school students are able to enter secondary education if we are going to continue with this heavily burdenized system. So as Kofi said, we should be looking at how we deburdenize our secondary education, to the community level so that we can reduce costs, as we have in South Africa, which also have been running about 15 years or so, a free secondary education, but heavily burdened, a heavily day system. The challenge is that we have politicized the strategic decisions. Party A comes and then they say we are building community-based schools. Then they build it to about 70%. Then Party B comes and say, no, we are building boarding schools. So because we don't have a synergic approach to our secondary education vision, we might end up wasting resources by going boarding, 8 years boarding, then another 8 years day, and then we are throwing resources away. We need to have a plan. But I think that the best economically efficient way to expand access to secondary education is to use the day concept, because that is what I've been proving in almost every country in the world. And Ghana cannot get it. The earlier for us, the better. This will iron out the issues of cost efficiency, cost effectiveness, and value for money as we travel this long journey of secondary education. By 2030, we want to see every child that enrolls in primary school completing secondary school. Currently, about 40% are not completing secondary school. And so I think that we must look at cost efficient ways of expanding access to quality secondary education without necessarily affecting the value, and also without excluding the poor from accessing secondary education.
Okay. With the emphasis that Professor Ajiman Bafodua, brings on the questioning about community ownership and development, an opportunity for communities, the economies of communities, where these schools are to also, boom. We have some issues. What can be done about that? Because you are in the thick of these things. You go to the communities and you do your research around them. On the feeding, particularly, there was a time that we had, poultry farmers who were supplying the eggs and whatever was needed for the school feeding program, complaining. And I had some of them sending, messages to me directly that it appeared that the political situation had caught up with the feeding as well. Number one, apart from the fact that those two responsible for providing the supplies had been restricted to party people, women in the party. So you have to be a women's organizer or something like that within a particular region or community to be given the opportunity to participate in the school feeding. Apart from that, there was also, people in Accra with money who got a contract or contracts to import like sardines from, or whatever it is, mackerel from, I think, China. And that, as it were, killed the local business, those who were supplying eggs and the rest. What do you know about that situation, and what can be done to correct that?
I think what I know about the situation is what you just said. Yes, the focus is not about creating socioeconomic opportunities within the local community, but the focus mainly is to procure and feed the children. And so what Professor Baford Mandia said about the economics of the school feeding program beyond the nutrition will have to be given some prominence, especially under the Ghana school feeding program at the basic level. I must admit that in many communities, you will see many homegrown solutions. I was in Bongo MA Basic, and I saw 100%, local food and beans being used to prepare a very, very nutritious meal, and I was happy. I think a lot of effort have gone into trying to localize, the menu of the Ghana school feeding program. But at the secondary level, because senior high schools are not community owned, because community participation in the management and governance of senior high schools is not it's nowhere taught, near the level of community participation at the basic level. It is something that must be intentional on when signing contracts for procurement and when committing them. But there are two things that need to happen before we can have increased local content.
If you can list that, just list them for us.
The first one is that we must be prepared to pay more, because the cost of rice, local rice is sometimes expensive than imported rice. So if you sign a contract with me to supply rice, 100 kg, and you want me to buy local rice, you must be prepared to pay more, because the cost of production in Ghana is high. We're taking loan at 30% interest rate compared to 1% in China or so. So we must be prepared to pay more and understand that we are creating jobs and building our GDP.
Right. And the second is what?
The second is that we must depoliticize the procurement of food in our educational system. If we depoliticize it, then you are going to have a situation where the education ministry or the buying agencies will now be dealing directly with a lot of farms and factories directly, reduce the middlemen, so that we get good value for money.
All right.
And then we don't bring in unnecessary agents within the value chain or the supply chain.
Thank you very much, Kofi Asare. Yes, Prof.
Mine is a very simple one. In the next, during the next discussions, I think we'll have opportunity to exchange on the interesting points you made.
Okay.
But for now, I wanted to recall the comment by Professor Dimensa that you played when he referred to the idea, notion of schools growing their own food at the back. Yeah, then I think that's a powerful statement. We shouldn't overlook that. You see, back in 2004, I had the opportunity to lead a team, including the then Minister for Local Government, Mr. Ajay Mensah, if I remember, short, nice guy with a cap. We went to Germany for 2 weeks to understudy their decentralized system. And we came away with a very interesting philosophy of the Germans. It's like the onion ring theory. You see, if you open an onion, there's a center. Then you have these layers coming all the way out. So they look at society's development in such a way that it begins with the core, the family. Then the family's existence will then, of course, depend on the next layer, which will be the community, to simplify it. Then beyond the community is the nation. So if they are talking about development, they have a concept they call help for self-help. Help for self-help, which is that you have to initiate your development. And as you are doing so, and there are some difficulties beyond your capability, the government will step in. I'm just simplifying this theory. What it means is that in the present situation, if we allow the local communities to take charge of this, let them use their own capabilities, but where they are unable to do so, government will have a policy to come and back them up. You see, we have to have a certain philosophical underpinning for what we do.
All right.
Otherwise, we do things without any rationale and in a very haphazard way. And that's what we're experiencing.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to
thank you very much. Kofi, in a minute, what's it you want to add?
So we've studied the coupon system and the idea of empowering the local economy. I agree with Prof that it has to be philosophical. The philosophy should be to decentralize it totally.
Correct.
Any centralization goes back. The coupon system allows you to empower the local economy because you give a coupon to the child and the child can go and buy the food wherever they want. So indeed, they can buy from the local watches seller. And when the watches seller is a good watches, seller, they accumulate coupons and they can go and redeem that for cash or for food stock or other things. What that does is that nobody has to buy anything, nothing is centralized.
Okay.
And then what exists already in the community grows. We can explain it later, but that has been tested in other places and has been shown to be the best model. Okay.
But certainly we should be doing away with the procurement mentality where...
The coupon system allows you to do that. It decentralizes procurement.
We are using the local products already and then somebody shows up to say, I can bring in these tons of sardine or mackerel from China. And then we give the whole contract to them, obviously, for the kickbacks that exist in there. Some of you have sent in your messages. Let me start with the ranking in Parliament on education. Dr. Clement Apak, he says, the food situation in our secondary schools is worrying. And it is not just schools in the upper region. Of course, we have seen charts from the eastern or western region also issue a statement in that regard. They wanted to shut down. Why are buffer stock food suppliers not making food available to the schools? Does government owe buffer stock food suppliers? If so, how much? Well, maybe you joined before Kofi Asare took us on that issue. And why must government owe buffer stock food suppliers when 2.3 billion was approved for the free SHS for 2022. Something doesn't add up. Well, that's an interesting question. By the way, he has filed an urgent question on the buffer stock and its suppliers. So he's hoping that the education minister will be in the house to answer to them. Right. The education minister is a minister that I believe all of us have hope and trust that he's more than competent in this regard. Little Tete says Ghana's economy has not seen enough structural transformation to propel it into an economic giant. You can't cut what you can't name. Mismanagement of our taxes is the major cause. When leaders are held accountable, things will change. Let's start here. Then Rock Ghana says we can rely on the planting for food and jobs. Oh wait, it has already failed. MPP is wrapping power and delivering it to their opponent willingly. Then Sly Dusted says the problem starts and ends with buffer stock. A lot of farmers have the capacity to supply buffer stock with the non-perishable goods 24/7, but contracts are always given to, quote, we all know who, unquote, with no monitoring, supervision, and accountability. This has to stop. Anlo Victor says, look no further. Newsfile should just look to the Ghana card. The solution to all of our problems is there. Indemi Song says, Ministry of Finance should disburse the funds timely every month. Nazeth Al-Hassan says, let's put politics aside and face reality. This challenge has been with us, but made worse by the introduction of political policy of free senior high school education. MB Nampoan says we have much arable lands, very good for farming. Let's farm and stop talking. And Rexford Jan says government should reduce the pressure on the boarding facilities and on the boarding facilities and give priority to science and maths courses. Well, they are looking at STEM. You heard about that. They should also have a cutoff for entry into the SHS. And finally, more day students within the catchment areas must be prioritized. Thank you for those messages. And then Kwesi says, here is my question. How did school feeding become the province of the women's wings of the political parties? This is the bane of that problem. It has to be under the appropriate local district office, working with the local assembly system. And that is absolutely on point. Well, even COVID funds were distributed with party officers, and they were fighting over who got much and who didn't get much. You can't explain how that happens. COVID funds. Why? Was the party, officers in the region part of the COVID-19, fighting? Or it was the hospitals that were doing that job? We need explanation to that. If you think we have left that issue and you can get away with it. I'll read a final one from Yakubu Ibn Chambers. He says, in this country of ours, we blow hot and cold on serious issues so much, we run round in circles expecting a miracle to common problems that face us. Be it NDC, CPP, PNC, and MPP in power, there has always been a general expectation on the government that is seated in Accra to carry the national load. There is many economic connoisseurs who can transform the economy of Ghana within a twinkling of an eye, but are sitting on the fence. Government can do it all alone and cannot do it all alone and must confess. That is from Yakubu Ibn Chambers. Thank you for your messages. We will take a break and return to look at the governance issue. Is it the case or it is not that we can run a government of 19 ministers and find a way to cut the political spending for political campaigns? Osaiche Mensa Bonsu, he's deep in there. So when he comes out to say these things about the inflated contracts that people must use as a means to build a war chest to prosecute a successful election campaign, you better believe him. If you attack us when we say it, well, I suppose you don't attack him when he says it because he's one of you. And as you are at the Accra Sports Stadium, working to elect your national officers, we hope that at this moment, the money that is being shared is coming from genuine pockets. We'll be right back.
Many of our ministers do not add value to our governance. That's the truth. And I'm not here talking about the current MPP administration. I refer to all administrations since 1993. The time has come for us to seriously introspect on this. And hasn't the time come for us to place in the Constitution an upper ceiling on the number of ministers of state that we should have? As I've already stated, cabinet ministers assist the president in the evolution of policies. That is according to Article 76 of the Constitution. All bills and agreements that are presented to Parliament are underpinned by governmental policy and principles, which the cabinet ministers propose to cabinet. So if you are not a cabinet minister, you are not part of the process of the evolution of policy. Where we are going as a nation is not sustainable. We are getting on a very slippery road in terms of monetizing our politics, both parliamentary elections and presidential elections. And I think that, as a matter of fact, my preference, my personal preference, is with the Westminster type, where the prime ministers are much more accessible to us. One, and then in terms of expenditures, they spend far, far less in getting themselves elected from the constituencies, right? And that obligation to satisfy sponsors is much, much less. With that, we'll be able to deal with corruption. And then again, because the prime minister is a member of parliament, peer review should tell you that you can't be a prime minister when I know that before you became a prime minister, you had only one house. And 4 years after becoming a prime minister, you have 10 houses. My friend, where did you get it from? Any president appoints more than 5,000 officers into public office. We are still counting. This certainly, Professor Chairman, is a monarch that the Constitution has created. The rest of us citizens hold him in awe, and even when he strays, it is difficult to talk straight to him. This arrangement needs to be revisited. It cannot be good for our growth. It cannot be good for the growth of democracy.
Right. So that's Osei Mensah Bonsu. He's been in Parliament long enough, has sufficient experience. Maybe apart from Bagbing, I think there's none other in that Parliament that knows as much as he does. So, what is prompting him to now come forward and join the calls and the advocacy that has been going on for a while? Let's begin with Professor Bafo Adjumani. This is his area of comfort, and so when you listen to him across the issues he raises, are they doable? Will they give us an efficient government? Will they actually cut the corruption?
Thank you, Samson. Let me say that I'm very happy that somebody of his standing is now coming out publicly to express such very important sentiments about governance in the country. And you're right, Samson. In the 2000s, CDD and others, we've been raising these issues. And over the past few months, I've personally been raising issues about the size of government and all. So I'm happy that somebody like him coming to add his voice, for me, means that at least we are gaining some momentum in addressing these issues. And to add to that, just last Thursday or so, I read yesterday that the Speaker of Parliament also made an interesting statement, in a way chastising Ghanaians that we don't seem to even respect Parliament. Everything is the president, the president, the president. You remember that statement?
That's right.
That is a strong indication of a widening recognition of what the 92 Constitution has done for us. Look, I always give credit to the 92 Constitution for at least being resilient enough to bring us 30 years on this democratic journey. And I'm happy about that. But the Constitution is full of deficits, either because of how we rush to put it together, not thinking too much about our own history, our cultural traditions, forgetting that all constitutions in so-called democracies are built on something. And that something is the people's history, culture, and experiences. And I like making the quick distinction here. You see, democracy has two levels. The upper level, we call the principle or theoretical democracy, refers to those values that are universal. Freedom, liberties, justice, equalities, those are universal. You don't have to be black, white, or green to enjoy those things. That is there. But every society has a responsibility to reduce these theoretical, what you call the values, to a practical level. And that's what we call practice democracy. And that refers to the institutions and systems that you create based on your history and culture. So you ask yourself, when they were putting the 92 Constitution together, to what extent did they reflect even on our history from 57 to 92? Not to go, before then. What was there? What influenced them? Samson, the idea of having 4-year tenure. What informed it? Because in Britain, there's no term limitation. You rule as long as the people want you. Once I think James was referring to the parliamentary system, once the Conservatives decided Boris Johnson is no longer useful, they found a way after 2.5 years to get him out. That's their system. But if you are good to them, like Margaret Thatcher was there for 13 years. Angela Merkel in Germany, how many years was she there as Chancellor? 18 years. She just left barely a year and a half ago. So the point I'm making is that even the tenure of office is based on some reasoning that normally comes from their history and their culture. But we just say 4 years and second tenure. Why? Okay, so that's just one illustration. Then all the institutions we have created, the system we have created, what we are facing, Samson, is that, and I think the majority leader said it right, the Constitution has created what we call an imperial president. He used the term a monarchy. Imperial presidency. And somebody has said it so wisely, Samson, that our Constitution gives so much power for a good president not to need, but for a bad president to have. You understand that? A bad president with this Constitution, a rogue president, can run us into the ditch. And if you're a good president, you don't need all the powers that are given to you. But that's what we have. But when you are running the country, you are not running the country on the basis of somebody's personal idiosyncrasies. That's why we have the law, so we have the Constitution. So let's go back to the Constitution and see how we structure it. Now, coming to the size of government. He's right. I wasn't too much aware that there is an implicit limitation on the number of cabinet ministers. He said not less than 10 and no more than 19. But since this Fourth Republic, from Rawlings to the present, how many cabinet ministers do we have? Somebody could take us all the way to 120. You see?
All the ministers together.
And that's, and again, anyway. So what we are saying is that, and I agree with him, the present trajectory for our national progress could be getting us to where we don't want to be if we don't reverse it. So he's talking about basically a constitutional reform. And that's something I wholeheartedly support. Because there are so many contradictions in the Constitution. You're a lawyer, you know what I'm talking about. Okay? So the size of government has been created without due regard to the resources available to back it up. You see, when we created additional 6 regions, it was good for those who clamored for it. And I think by and large, it refers to self-government in some form or shape. But what we forgot was that was going to add to our expenditure. After every census, we go ahead and create more constituencies. Right? I hope after this letters, they are not going to come up with that.
No. Well, we are hearing those party people that at a certain level, reasonable citizens don't take them serious, but within their parties, they are gods, yes, so to speak. We are hearing them beginning to talk about the fact that there's a need to even break down some of the constituencies, a lot more. Even in Kumasi, the Ashanti region, that you need to break it down a lot more.
Bottom line, to increase?
Yes, to increase the number.
How? Then they will come and say, we need a bigger parliament building, isn't it? No. So the expenditures. State creates institutions at will, forgetting that any institution you create require a piece of the national pie. So for me, I look at all this and wonder or rather not surprised, that we have borrowed all the way to the ceiling. We cannot even borrow anymore. Now we need a bailout. So I'm saying, in addition to your corruption you made, I think the size of government and the way we operate it in itself is a major source of waste of our resources.
He's saying that we need a ceiling. But he, at the same time, he seems to sound as though the Constitution has already provided a ceiling, except that we have breached it. To the point that you have, very surprising, and I have not hidden my disgust about this to the president himself, either private or public, that to have somebody like Nana Akufo-Addo, with the background that we all sort of knew of him and the depth that he was bringing to the politics, to wake up to him defending over 100 ministers, over 120 ministers, in fact, was very shocking. So he is saying that, he says, it is my contention that apart from regional ministers, the number of central government ministers may not have to exceed 19, as contained in the Constitution. And that this means ministries should also not exceed 19. From his point of view, the Constitution's provision for cabinet ministers should be the limit.
That's what he's saying. And I also have read a statement by a veteran politician, a practical one indeed, Mr. Kojo Mpianim, former chief of staff of former President Kufuor, also saying that if you place that kind of limitation, you are preventing the president from perhaps exercising his office. That's also true, but I believe strongly, and if you compare the number of ministers all over the place, in other countries, a country of this size do not need that number.
Exactly.
The 19 is perfect. You see, and what is even more troubling, Samson, is that we create ministers for one role at 3 levels. Minister of State, a minister, 2 ministers, a deputy ministers, for the same kind of function. And one sits at the Jubilee House.
I think we had as many as, is it 4 for national security alone?
Exactly. You see, and this goes back to the notion of imperial presidency, where a president can create things at will. Because you don't have to go to parliament to seek permission. In fact, any president, if you sleep overnight and you wake up the next morning and feel like creating a ministry for your friend or girlfriend or whatever, nothing stops you from creating that ministry. Because you don't need parliamentary approval. So again, talking about controlling this, it means that in the new constitution that we should be looking forward to, there will be all kinds of checks and balances in a proper way to curtail what we call the imperial presidency. And I think that's the bottom line of what Mr. Chairman's Bonsu, the majority leader, is trying to tell us. So I do agree. And based on our resources that we are even unable to manage, and even the way we are managing our resources is very much influenced by the governance structures we have. When we're discussing the school feeding program, the whole notion of decentralizing management. Look, there's what we call the National Food Buffer Stock, right?
That's right.
It's a bureaucracy that waits for government to bring you millions of cedis to go and procure things to supply. Like Kofi Bensil said, why can't this be done at the assembly level? So the point is simply that there's an urgent need for serious reforms of our constitution, because first, I submit to you, the constitution was rushed. Certain things were not taken into account. It was written to satisfy or pacify a certain individual at the time. Jerry Rawlings. Unfortunately, he's gone. So we should go back and make sure we get the constitution that suits us, taking into account what I said earlier, our history, our culture, our traditions, to ensure that this constitution truly reflects the needs of our people.
Whilst he talks about the ministers who are actually not needed,
not adding value,
helpful, yes, not adding value. Well, people have sought to ask the question. Well, he himself is presiding over, this ministry that has been controversial. Anytime any president wants to introduce it, Minister of Parliamentary Affairs. Yeah. While it is important not to reduce the arguments, the debate to him. Yeah. Does he have the right? Does he have the moral right to be able to talk about these things when he is actually adding up to the problem?
Samson, look, I think if the devil comes out to say, being a devil is no good, I'm giving it up, accept it. Yes. He is in the thick of things, like you rightly say. Mm-hmm. Maybe in the review we are talking about, we'd consider that there's no need for Minister for Parliamentary Affairs. But you see, this comes as a result of the structure, because we have a few system of governance, partly parliamentary, partly presidential. And the president, by the constitution, is compelled to have majority of his ministers from within parliament. Again, blurring the role of parliament to be effective in checking the executive. So that these deficits are clear. And I think not just what Chairman Sambonsu has said, many other things have been said by all of you over the years. And this is the time for us to really put our minds together to get a better constitution for ourselves.
Do you subscribe to his proposition for the Westminster system? There are people who have said, let's do proportional representation also. He said, for example, that there is a nexus between the campaign expenditure and corruption, fueled by award of contracts. So when I read this, I had to pinch myself to be sure that it was
He's the one saying that.
he who was saying it. Literally agreeing to what we have always known, that the reason you have the inflated contracts, the kickbacks, the reason the contracts are given to party people so that they will now in turn sell the contract to another person and get a 10% is because of campaign financing. He says the Westminster system is the way to reduce this corruption.
You say yes or no? On one level, certainly the ability of the party in power to check its leader, like the Brits just did with Boris Johnson, may impress all of us as perhaps one effective way. I have no problem with that. But you see, this is where I had a difference with my brother here in our earlier conversation. It is not a matter of changing parties. Because so far as I'm concerned, there's little difference, if any, between the NDC and the NPP. Because the system we have created is what they inherit. So far as they will come and inherit that system, their behavior will be almost the same. So talking about Chairman Sonson's point about monetizing our politics and the corruption and kickbacks, all the parties do that. You see, let us not mince our words. These two parties, NDC, NPP, they are both corrupt when they are in power.
That's it.
So if you chase out our good friend Mahama because he was corrupt, I'm sure somehow this person is also going to be chased out. So you bring him back, and it's the same system, there will be corruption.
But the citizens are now more engaging.
Well,
citizens are far more engaging now. They won't allow that nonsense. Like our contract, like they will not let the president sleep until he does something about this Northern Development Authority CEO and then Napaga and all those people.
Oh,
yes. So that is it. Citizens holding.
I agree, and for me, that's again my point that citizens should rally together, and find a way to pressure those who can kickstart the process of review of the Constitution to start. Because any democracy where citizens are dormant, and I think when the president took his oath, he made an interesting statement to that effect, that become participants, not spectators. Whenever we become just spectators, then your leaders will just take you for a ride. Okay? So I agree very strongly. And I think by and large, Ghanaian citizens are becoming more proactive, and the advocacy is getting bigger and bigger.
Professor Kwekwa Sari is asking that we have been talking. When are we going to do it? Shouldn't it be incremental? In 2011, 2012, we did a Constitution Review Commission process. You know, it's valued, the work it did is valued at $6.3 million.
Yes.
It's gathering dust.
Because, Samson, I'm aware of that and have a copy of that report with our good friend, Professor Tubuga, being the Executive Secretary. I've gone through that report. The interesting thing is that even some of the key issues raised by citizens were rejected by the government of
Yes.
Okay? So it shows you that the politicians themselves, they seem to have a vested interest in the status quo. They do have. That clique, and they include the administrative elite also.
But the ones that they accepted in the white paper, if we had implemented even just a quarter, would have moved forward.
Well, they had the opportunity to do so. Ask yourself, why didn't they do that? From the Bahama
himself took them to court.
Yeah,
by
but
the time the court was done, there wasn't much time. Yes.
So as for the lamentations our good friend is referring to, we have become nation of lamenters. I agree. The lamentations are just too much. We need action. As civil society people, the actions we should take is the challenge. We need to take that to shake up the politicians, to sit straight and look into our eyes and tell us what they stand for. But this go and come, we vote you out 8 years, we vote you in 8 years, and we come and do the same kind of damage to this country. By the way, my final point. People forget that between 1972 and 78, we never went to the IMF for bailout. That's the only period in our national history. People forget. Who was in power then?
A champion.
Kutu Champon. You remember his program of Operation Feed Yourself?
Heard a bit about it.
And when Professor Adai Mensah was referring to school gardening, during that period, here in Accra, people were growing their own food at their backyards. In that period, between 74 75, we exported rice to Burkina Faso. Tamale was known as the rice city, if you can remember that. So we have done it before. And when a champion declared Yentuya, the World Bank privately came and pleaded, pacified him with 1% interest on loans, because of the fear that other developing countries, if they pick up this mantra of Yentuya, the bank will suffer. So I'm saying that there's a history we can go back. We don't need to be going back to this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And this is Newsfile. Is brought to you by Bank of Africa, strong as a group and close as a partner, MTN everywhere you go. Ashesi University, educating ethical and entrepreneurial leaders for Africa. Robert & Sons Optical Services, your comprehensive eye care services provider for 31 years. Waylead Properties, home is where one starts. Fanat, Ghana. Think wood, think Fanat. And I'm now thinking whether I should get to Martin before I go to Kofi Bento. But I will take a break before I return. And Martin, on the issue that you have been very, heavy on corruption. This matter of the special prosecutor going to court to freeze Sir John's properties, confirm the freezing because he has already frozen them. One of the opposing side, Sir John's, people, and Nana Obribwain, who is the lawyer, who is also a deputy general secretary of the NPP, did an affidavit for the court, and he said, look, the special prosecutor is being a busybody. Do you know why? He says there are many people who are stealing from the state and they are alive. You should go after those people and leave the dead man alone. Actually, in the affidavit, they say that his uncle left him some gold, stuff. So he has the wherewithal to be able to do a few things. He said, they said this in the affidavit, that a good number of Ghanaians have raped and looted the resources of this country, with some still continuing to do so. This is the General Secretary, Deputy General Secretary of the party. With some still continuing to do so. Who are they that he's talking about? Who the SP has failed to crack the whip on and has rather embarked on the present venture, which is nothing less than witch hunting. And that the SP would be better off dealing with the suspicious amassing of wealth by these people that he's talking about. So even the people within the parties have a certain awareness, or beyond the awareness, they actually have facts, they know.
Yes.
And I brought this up to mention to you that I have just discovered that the thing we have been talking about, you know, to be able to take, what do you call it? Unexplained wealth.
Unexplained wealth. Article 286.
The SP has a provision for that to help. And I can hope that this same court where they went, you know, that court is like the court that deals with almost about 70% of the corruption cases, and is jailing people, and you have such a fair and fair judge in that court. So we can hope to see more. We'll be right back after this break. Right, so let me have Martin's perspective on these issues before we go to hear from Kofi Bento. Clement Akapam says that the relevant ministries this country actually needs are the Finance Ministry, the Justice Ministry, the Auditor General, Attorney General? The Auditor General, he means, I suspect, Natural Resources and Environment, Local Government, Tourism and Culture, that can be one ministry, Agriculture, Education and Sports, Information and Communication, and 10, Energy and Petroleum. That only 10, as far as he's concerned by his analysis, is what we need. We don't even need 19. Yes.
Okay. Yes. Well, what can we say? The bottom line, as long as it will help us to save the public purse, I'm for it. And you know this matter. Was it last year? Haruna also came up with his own number. I think he came up with about 64. That's Haruna Idrisu, the minority leader. Okay, so people have come with numbers, and it's good profits here. CDD, earlier on in the 2000s, you had numbers. I have 88, around 80. That's the four numbers.
It was 80,
yes.
82.
CDD did a lot of work and complained. So we've had this conversation on and on and on. We've come full circle.
Right. I think Dr. Indum was promising about 40 or so, and then Emmanuel was saying we needed 20.
20, well, look, so we've come full circle. You remember when President Kufuor was appointing these people and we made noise, no, I'm in a hurry, you know? And then Mustafa Hamid came out and said the civil servants are incompetent. They failed us. They are not able to do their job. You check March 2017. Yes, when all these things came out. Now we've come full circle. We've come back to the point that we must reduce. Of course, we all know that if they hadn't had lost their seats in Parliament, probably they wouldn't have reduced it. Because people advised him. He said, no, he would not listen. He would not listen. You see? And like they say, the fly that refuses advice follows the corpse into the grave. Today we are in the grave with the IMF.
Osei actually says that the Attorney General should not be the Minister for Justice.
Yes. That's because mantra.
Yes, because over the years, I don't know how they can't come public and say it. But when you speak to them privately, they admit to you.
Yes.
For a number of attorney generals I have interacted with, they tell you, I can't prosecute this person.
Excellent.
It just won't work.
Excellent.
I sit with them in cabinet.
That's right.
How do you expect me to prosecute them?
Excellent. Good. Yes. So that's how come we brought our special prosecutor, which still falls short of it. So now that we've seen that, yes, we'll keep special prosecutor, but let's go back to it, that let's decouple them. In the First Republic, we decoupled them. Yes, when you check the Constitution Review Commission report, it tells you that in the First Republic, the office of the Attorney General was different from the office of Minister of Justice. And that's us, Ghana. You take 2 steps forward and then 4 backwards. That's just us. Yeah, it's in there that in the First Republic, we had the office of the Attorney General being separate from the office of Minister of Justice. And the UK, of course, we copied from them. They are doing it. So why don't we just go back to it? Sankofa. So on the matter of Attorney General being decoupled, I perfectly agree. We'll keep special prosecutor is doing a good job, but we need more hands. Because you see, Sam, the plain truth is that, these criminals are very tough-skinned, very tough-skinned. They dig in their heels. You think, you come and talk once and they will leave. No, they scheme to increase, find ways to outwit you. Because they tell you it's a mafia game, all right? So let's get more hands, decouple the office of the Attorney General from the Minister of Justice. Then 2, Sam, you see, plain truth. We need the system to work. When we reduce the numbers and we don't get the systems to work, we will not do much. We will not do much. Because you just read from the court, the judgment of the court, where Ubri Buahin is telling the court that there are other people currently stealing. And some, you and I know some of them. Look, there are stories. Look, I can show you there's a part of Accra where you go. Within 2 years, a Minister of State has bought 4 houses straight. 4 houses, a chain. This is somebody, a whistleblower took me there. And I was like, okay, I'll wait for the president to take action or special prosecutor to take action on this Northern Development Authority case first, before we go there. The minister has bought 4 houses. Look, bought his house, bought his neighbor out, the next neighbor, and the next. Prime area in Accra. And you look at the figures involved, and you're like, Master, in 10 years, your salary can never buy these 4 houses.
So unexplained wealth is the best way to go.
Yes.
Because you may not be able to catch the person stealing.
Yes, we'll go to Shraj. We will go to Shraj with him. I just want to see the end of this Northern Development Authority case, okay?
That seems to be very close. Yes. He's so angry about it.
So look at the 4, Article 286 clause 4. Any property or assets acquired by a public officer after the initial declaration required by clause 1 of this article, and which is not reasonably attributable to income, gift, loan, inheritance, or any other reasonable source, shall be deemed to have been acquired in contravention of this Constitution. And Shraj has the mandate. You remember during the Rawlings regime, there was this, is it I.K. Mafu? He was a minister for lands and natural resources. He bought property in the name of his son, Ajay Mafu.
Ajay Mafu.
Yes.
Brother of
Shraj
Mafu.
Brother. Oh, okay. Well, you see. So,
except that Shraj doesn't have the regulations, the rules that will empower it to activate this law.
Right, it's a constitutional provision. They can just implement it. They say confiscate. So if they finish and say you are indicted, I agree, Sam. We can help Shraj maybe push that they should come out with the regulations. But Shraj shouldn't sit on his hands just because the regulations are not yet in. I know Shraj has been doing well. From time to time, they sue Attorney General and win. You remember this case Tadiosori did, the one at Amils wrote to Shraj to investigate the Mabe and Johnson case. Yes, and then Baba Kamara said he couldn't be investigated because he wasn't a public officer. Yeah. Tadiosori led Shraj to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said no, they can investigate you as a private person. Yes, and we all know what happened to the Mabe and Johnson case. So please, Shraj, look, let's implement Article 286 clause 4 that once the money, the income, and everything is beyond the person's means, it should be confiscated. And this is not the first time. I always mention the Jage Commission. Always mention Jage Commission. Okay, how Kwame Nkrumah's ministers were hauled before the commission, and those who couldn't account for the properties and all that, those properties were taken. Yeah, so for that one, I support. Sam, apart from that, the next one that I'm looking at is that, but let's put this in context before I come to the issue of ministers being appointed from Parliament. From the way Chairman Sabonsu's statement, I suppose he knows it very well. From Article 78, the Constitution is giving the President a sort of a blank check. It says in clause 2, 78.2, it says, the President shall appoint such number of ministers of state as may be necessary for the efficient running of the state. So if 76.1 says that there should be a cabinet which is not more than 19, and 78.2 says appoint such as are necessary, it means that beyond the cabinet there can be more ministers. So perhaps as part of the constitutional review, then we'll put an upper limit and remove the 78.2. Good. Yeah, so now on the matter of parliamentarians being ministers, we know that, look, that's been the biggest problem in this our parliament of the Fourth Republic. It's weakened parliament. Weakened parliament because the parliamentarians who belong to the president's party usually would not want to oppose the government. They want to support. And in actual fact, they behave in a way as to catch the president's eye. They want ministerial appointments. So we have to, from my experience, make sure that we go back to the Third Republic, where when you're a minister of state, you are not a member of parliament. Yes, people will quickly say, oh, Liman's budget was thrown out. But in life, when we fail, don't we try again?
Try again.
Don't we try again? 1979, that's at least 42, 43 years. Is that also? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So we can try again. So I'm all in support of us decoupling ministers of state from being MPs. So that when a man goes to parliament as an MP, he wants to do his best, so that rather in criticizing and holding government to account, he would rather be seen to be a better citizen. But this time, Prof, you mentioned our values. Ghana, what are our values? Number 1 value is to get rich. Number 2 value, get rich. Number 3, get rich anyhow. You see, so when that is the system, the man wants to catch the president's eye. He doesn't want to reveal anything. He doesn't want to punch loopholes. Yes. He wants to be minister, okay? And if he's minister, he gets all the V8s and all that. So Sam, for me, Ochie Mensah Bonsu's call for the reforms, I support. We should decouple. Then you come to the judiciary. Oh, and by the way, before we delve further into the judiciary, the last time they did something that really gladdened my heart. They've come out with a statement that the ex gratia, they don't get any ex gratia. That's very important. So for viewers,
it's normally arrears.
Yes, yes. So it's good because it was quite tacky. The last time we were discussing it, I was like, are they part? Are they not part? But they've clarified that they don't get ex gratia. Okay, so they are out, and that restores some confidence in the judiciary. That's very good. All right. So apart from that, you look at the Electoral Commission. So judiciary, let's finish up on it. Appointment of the Chief Justice and members of the Superior Court of Judicature. I think we want to see a way of, once again, getting them more independence. The fact that in most places in the world, the president, appoints CJ, doesn't mean that we should continue here. Prof, you have said our values. Our values. What are our values? Currently in our system, people would want to see the judiciary far more independent. So if we have to cut the umbilical cord, that next time the president should not appoint a chief justice, so be it. It looks like that is what we need in our current circumstances, right? So we are not bound to say that, in the UK, the prime minister has a hand in appointment of the chief justice and all that, the queen. No, we are not bound. Or in the US, we are not bound. We can chart a course for ourselves that we will, in the amendment, the reforms, that the Chief Justice and the members of the Supreme Court are not appointed by the President. Let the Judicial Council do so. And of course, to the membership of the Judicial Council itself, we'll look at it and remove the President's control. Because until we do some of this, like you keep saying, the imperial President, his hands are everywhere. Everywhere. And so far, apart from, like I keep saying, Atta who came and was seen as quite an honest man, the rest have not had any good standing in our society. So we're always looking at them with suspicion and all that. So it doesn't give any confidence in our system. Right. So for me, the judiciary, I want to see the Supreme Court and Chief Justice being appointed through the Judicial Council without the President, so that they can get true independence. Independence as understood by the common man. Otherwise, this kind of independence is a bit mythical. Yes, it's, Okay, now, so quite apart from that, what else should we look at? The EC. I remember in 2016, when we were getting ready to boot out Mama, Gabi came out with a very brilliant idea, Gabi Ochridako. He said, for the appointment of the EC, The civil society organization should be involved. There should be an open public interview where a few civil society organizations will do the nominations. Then there will be a public interview with a very expert panel. Then they will interview the candidates one by one, and the citizens will have there will be transparency. They will see so that the best is chosen. Right? So that means that one too, let's carry it. Let's carry it, because after all, Gabi supports it. I support. That's what we supported. There's no reason for us to change now, so that we amend the constitution in that regard. Because the EC, appointment of the EC is going to be going into the future.
I was laughing because you said Gavi supports. Gavi is not in government. He doesn't hold a public office.
Oh, but we all know that a lot stops on his desk. Yes, he controls a lot in public. Right. Yeah, so there are still quite a number. There are other independent constitutional bodies and rest. So in one word, Sam, it's very clear that we need constitutional reforms. I like how Prof put it. Very urgent. And so if we don't get any reforms before President Akufo-Addo leaves, then it means that we'll call his regime the lost decade. That would be the lost decade.
Anyway,
so let's do something.
He used to talk about overhauling the constitution. I hope that he's still interested in that. I think, is it Professor Kokwasare who is saying that, Martin, Article 78 is not a blank check. Parliament is not obliged to approve everyone who is nominated as a minister. Nothing stops Parliament from saying the pairs can only support 20 ministers. The president is too powerful because those who are to act as a check on his powers have abdicated. This includes Parliament, the courts, and sadly, even the media. Okay, so we are all guilty, but we should begin to get our loins and ensure that the right things are done. Otherwise, they'll continue to lead us to the IMF, and we continue to be poor whilst they get the best of life. And a president's life. Once they are president, they will live on their salary forever until they die, after they have, as it were, left office. Let's go to Kofi Bento. Yes, Kofi, Imani, particularly led by yourself, you had been saying for a long time that the bloatedness is too much, and we can do with, is it 20 ministers?
20. And I have a confession here. So we did all kinds, and this is many years ago, analysis and things, and came to 20, that it's possible to run the country with 20. That was before I saw the constitutional provision on 19. So that's a confession. And it therefore resonated with me that, look, there is wisdom in this thing. Then there is a 78. By the way, I do believe that the issue of Article 19 is a matter of interpretation. And I think that in the intendment of the framers of the Constitution, they believe that given that we have chief directors and whatever, you could run this country with 19 ministers, and that they all must be in cabinet. Then you have the regional ministers. Okay, so the 78 there, I think, is a conflict, because I think the president is being given some room, and it does not have to be ministers. Then you have the situation of having to pick ministers from Parliament. Because I made a brilliant suggestion that you can pick ministers of state. So, for instance, if you want to have 20 ministers and 50% have to be in Parliament, pick your 20 ministers out of Parliament and pick ministers of state and attach them to the ministries. They are attached there as ministers, but in reality, they don't have any real function, just to satisfy the Constitution. The point must, however, be made that let us commend Honorable Oseche Mensah Bonsu for speaking what he believes in. And even though he's in power, like you said, he's part of the problem in a sense, because there is absolutely no reason why you must have a ministry for parliamentary affairs. He has had the courage to come out and speak it. But let us also know that crisis gives clarity. And when somebody's clarity comes from crisis, we need to appreciate him, but also appreciate that you should never let that crisis go to waste. I think we should stop. I have stopped the lamentation, and I'm looking straight for solutions. So I'm going to go ahead and say, for instance, we don't need an attorney general. That the concept, we don't have time to go into it, but the concept is anachronistic, it's gone. What we need is a legal counsel for government who should sit in Flagstaff House And then we need to maintain the office of the special prosecutor to do prosecutions. And that person must not be the government's lawyer like the Attorney General. We don't need that one. And so many other ministers that we don't need. Now, we need to have the CSO coalition, which we've now formed. And by the way, I started talking to CDD more than a year ago. And I've made the point elsewhere that every election, general election that we have, is a referendum. What we need to do is to get one or two of the entrenched provisions questions on each general election.
Good point.
And vote over them.
Okay.
And I think that the CSO coalition we have now must push for at least 2 questions to go onto the 2024 general election, and let us start this constitutional, review process. We've talked too much about it. Correct. It is killing us. And listen, we are risking this republic. If you have a situation where the systems don't work, Atanos did his best. He spent $6 million. We had the Constitutional Review Commission. Nothing happened. We are all pushing. Nothing seems to be happening. You are going to get a bursting of the seams. Something is going to give. So I am saying, let us move to do the reforms. Look, I have a list of things that we could be talking about, but definitely we don't need more than 20 ministers. I also think that we must stop the EC from expanding our parliament. It is totally unconscionable for a poor country like us to have 275 parliamentarians, more than half of whom are basically functors. They don't really do anything.
That's right.
I do believe that we have today 16 regions. Okay, I can advance a clear argument that we need only 2 parliamentarians per region, and that there should be 2 others who are appointed by district chief executives. And I don't have the time to go into that, but the point is, parliament is for lawmaking. And we have a situation where today in our parliament, you don't need to have proficiency in English to be a parliamentarian. Meanwhile, you are going to have to make laws, read laws in English. And at least if you are going to make good laws, you need to have a sense of understanding of philosophy. I don't know how you're going to do that, without all that. So there are a lot of things we need to do. Concerning the ministers coming out of parliament, for instance, it doesn't make any sense. And the use of the Liman, situation that they threw his budget out, and that is why we have to do that, is totally converse. It is opposite what, should be. The purpose of parliament is to hold the executive to check. So if the budget was wrong, they should throw it out.
Even this parliament, even this parliament that is divided in the middle, so to speak, can you imagine that it is possible of using the power of impeachment? Can you imagine that it will be able to do so?
It's far-fetched, but it should be possible. It should be possible because look, we have had situations. Look, we were all here, like Marty was saying. We got on the streets and basically pushed President Mahama out. And some people were saying this is the worst that can happen. Okay, now we have come back to say, well, there's a lower bottom that we can go to. There is a time can come. Look, all law is about restriction of power.
All right.
So those who think that the president's hand is not tied, the purpose of law is to tie your hands.
Okay.
So you can do whatever you want.
Hold on. I want you to listen to the president briefly. Just listen to him.
These solemn pledges to you, the people of Ghana. I make these solemn pledges to you, the people of Ghana. To all those who have been dismayed by the level of corruption under this NDC government, I ask for your vote. I am committed to fighting corruption vigorously, and I shall exact the same high standards for members of my government as I have set for myself. I pledge that an Akufo-Addo government, which will be composed of a competent, dynamic team of men and women, will protect the public purse and ensure value for money in all financial transactions for the nation.
Kofi, has he kept this promise?
Not. Absolutely not. And there is the thing about efforts. If you give it a good shot and you miss, we will know you gave it a good shot and you missed. Unfortunately, we don't even see the effort. And many people will tell you that it seems like the president has just checked out. I say this with a heavy heart. But the truth of the matter is that we have had enough time. And in the beginning stages, we all gave him the benefit of the doubt. We all, cut him a lot of slack. You talk about his 120 ministers, and what is the performance we have seen? I remember also bringing that up. It says, wait and see how it's going to turn out. We have had enough time, and on that matter, the jury is out. There is, a lot of, stuff going on, which makes people believe that the corruption today is worse than what we threw out. The waste today is worse.
Thank you.
Really
Thank you so very much. I'll give just a minute to Professor Abafo Agyemang to say something in a minute, then we close the program.
Well, Samson, I think for all that we have discussed today, one thing we should not forget, and we haven't even discussed it, is what I call the attitudinal change that is needed. The mindset of Ghanaians. And here, I'm not excluding us.
Yes.
The mindset. A mindset, as you rightly said, which is based on making money, which in itself also continues to undermine the effectiveness of governance. So, that for me is the next greatest. So even if we are going to reform the constitution, we should also be looking at our educational system. What are we teaching our kids from the kindergarten all the way to the senior school level? Patriotism, nationalism, these elements, ethics, ethical behavior. We cannot rely on the churches to do this because they are perhaps the most unethical that I can think of. So the challenge is not just changing governments and also not just changing the constitution. It should come with additional changes in the mindset of Ghanaians towards the right things.
Thank you so very much. Professor Abafo Agyemang is former UN governance advisor. Martin Pebu is a lawyer and rights activist. Presently, he wants something to be done about Northern Development Authority forgery that was going to cost the country 5 million Ghana cedis that the president seems to keep a blind eye to. Kofi Bentil is lawyer and senior vice president in Imani Africa, and we also had Kofi Asare, executive director, Africa Education Watch. My outfit, as always, is by Habil's Couture. You can find them at Ajirengano Gate, East Legon, and on the number 0200 84 1988. And your election headquarters will continue the all-day coverage of the NPP's national officers' elections going on at the Accra Sports Stadium. And MFA Apau, that's your power woman on the screens, will tell us more about that. So I hand over to her.
We're right back after this, and this is your election headquarters. Please stay.